All right, everybody, with Aaron Maté here, and you have to give me about 30 seconds to draw out this intro because I am concurrently sending a tweet to promote this video. So we're going to test to see if I can multitask to the nth degree by simultaneously killing time right now and also composing a tweet. So, Aaron, how are you?
How you doing, Michael? I mean, this is a real test of your, 2019 content creator skills. To be a good content creator, Michael, you have to be able to tweet, upload, run a live stream, download something, all at the same time. So, I'm happy to be in this moment with you and to offer you moral support as you undertake it.
Well, I appreciate that deeply. And of course, you have to do all of the above while simultaneously fending off the losers and haters online, which compounds the challenge for me.
It does compound the challenge for you because you have a lot more losers and haters than I do. So
you have your fair share at this point. We have some mutual losers and haters, antagonists.
Yes.
All right, so the tweet is out.
And I'm going to retweet showing my dexterity at content creating.
Okay, and I just want to clarify for the record that I did not require you as a condition of participating in this chat to retweet the link. That's totally your own discretion.
That was optional. Yes.
Okay, and just for simplicity's sake, I am going to probably not focus much on the super chat because who knows what maniac might get into the chat and derail this conversation, which is very sacred. We have to preserve and keep pure. Okay, so to start, I'm going to tell you what my maybe favorite moment was yesterday, and then you can tell me if you agree with this selection of favorite moment and also provide your favorite moment. So one of my favorite moments was when Will Hurd, the Republican from Texas, was questioning Mueller during the the House Intelligence Committee hearing, the second one, I believe. And basically just wanted to get Mueller to confirm or deny some media stories that had been circulating and never definitively debunked or confirmed. And one of the stories that was brought up was this infamous Alpha Bank story. Everybody loves that story. There's still frequently discussion of whether Trump campaign officials illicitly communicated with Alpha Bank through a server somewhere in Pennsylvania. Okay, and you're laughing, but
it never stops being dumb. It never stops being dumb.
And that's why this is a story that keeps on giving, because although it's very tedious at times, you have to just revel in the absurdity.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So Mueller actually did. There were aspects of the report that addressed this claim.
Yeah.
And, but it didn't come right out and say that a particular story was incorrect, right?
Yeah.
So Mueller, in one of the few times that he said anything remotely revelatory or new, did come out and say that story was not true.
Yes.
Yes. So I felt vindicated, I have to say. I felt a burst of euphoria when I heard that one. So that was probably my favorite moment. What was yours?
Let me just say quickly on the Alpha Bank story. I mean, it'd be one thing if it'd be funny enough if one person had said that theory that there was illicit communications between Trump Tower and a Russian bank, and that's how the two sides secretly communicated. It'd be funny if one person said that, but this was the subject of serious discussion. I mean, we'll have to go back now and find how many segments this got on MSNBC or CNN. The New Yorker magazine, that prestigious journal, did a long article about it by one of its top correspondents, I think Dexter Filkins maybe, or something like that.
Dexter Filkins, who is this heralded war correspondent who is responsible for some of the most prestigious journalism that the New Yorker's ever produced.
We need to fact check this, actually. We need to fact check. I don't want to impugn Dexter Filkins.
No, it was Dexter Filkins.
Okay, so there we go. So, and it's one of, I don't know how many ridiculous stories that have either been retracted or discredited or refuted.
The
And,
Hillary Clinton Twitter account tweeted out this story on the eve of the 2016 election. It was one of the first big breaking bombshell Russia-related stories that the Clinton people really tried to promulgate.
it was originally written by Franklin Foer.
Right.
I can't believe we're opening up our talk on the Mueller hearing by just getting deep on Franklin Foer and Alpha Bank. But the problem is we could talk forever about how moronic this was and how many people screwed up so massively. So that's just how it is. But yeah, Franklin Foer also wrote the initial Atlantic article in the summer of 2016 called, Putin's Puppet about Trump, which Democrats also ran with. So,
and by the way, Franklin Foer, not some 26-year-old blogger for a digital media outlet that's about to shutter in 2 years.
No,
Franklin Foer was the former editor of the New Republic.
Yeah.
And is among the elite of the elite in magazine journalism in the United States. So that's part of why these kinds of stories got the traction they did, because people in positions of influence and prestige lent their credibility to them.
Yeah. So in terms of my favorite moment from the Mueller hearing, see, honestly, it's hard to talk about it in terms of favorites because the whole thing was so sad. And you think that if anybody would be enjoying this moment, it'd be those of us like you and I that have been saying that Russiagate was bullshit to begin with. And what could be a better argument for that view of ours than the fact that the savior figure, the person overseeing the investigation, was so clueless about his own investigation and struggling so strongly to, recall key facts and answer basic questions. So honestly, it was sad, and I can't hide that fact. But there was a moment when Mueller had to be guided about Fusion GPS and told who they were, and there's an assumption that Mueller did not know who Fusion GPS was, and I want to be as charitable as possible and say maybe he didn't fully get the context in which that question was posed. So he was familiar with a certain incident that was being asked then. I think that's one possible interpretation. But the point is he still had to be reminded of stuff that was in his report. He had to be. It was a great moment when that Republican Congress member asked him where in Justice Department history is there a legal precedent or guidance that says that that establishes a legal principle and establishes legal threshold where you have to exonerate someone, as opposed to the traditional role of a prosecutor being whether to allege chargeable conduct or not. And Mueller, of course, could not point to any. And
I'm still only hearing let's just dwell on that for a second, because I'm still only hearing Republicans comment on the utter farcical absurdity of this notion that it's somehow within the remit of a prosecutor to exonerate anyone.
Yeah.
That's totally warping one of the foundational tenets of American law. And for some reason, you have to rely exclusively on Republicans and conservative pundits to point out the ridiculousness of that. And if that were the principle that applied across the board, I mean, again, American law would just implode, because it's like the opposite of the Magna Carta. I mean, it goes back that far. So let me just read you what Mueller actually said, because tell me if you can parse what the heck this is supposed to mean, because honestly, it makes zero sense. Here's what he said. Quote, "The president was not exculpated for the acts he allegedly committed." I mean, that's like I don't know, like a puzzle that a law student would come up with when he was drunk one night or something. It doesn't logically flow.
You would, if you submitted that in law school as trying to make that a plausible argument or principle, it'd be rejected, because if somebody allegedly commits something, that means they're innocent until proven guilty, and but actually, moreover, they're not even alleged of doing something unless they're actually charged with it, And Mueller, of course, punted on a decision to charge, and didn't even go that far. So, yeah, it makes no sense. And I don't want to get too caught up in the obstruction thing, because I've always thought it was secondary. There's this widespread assumption that Mueller would have charged Trump for obstruction, if not for the OLC memo. Mueller shot that down when he retracted a statement in his exchange with Lou that suggested otherwise, but he even took that back. And then also people forget that, for all the, displays of intent on Trump's part to impede the investigation, people forget, and Mueller, reaffirmed this yesterday, that the investigation was not obstructed in any way. And then the problem with, if you want to allege obstruction based on intent, the problem is the Mueller report also lays out many arguments for why, from that point of view, Trump did not have a corrupt intent, because they point out that he was not found to be accused of any underlying crime related to Russian interference. So, I mean, you can't take the parts of the report that you want and ignore those that are inconvenient. And of course, the whole obstruction thing revolves out of what is supposed to be the core issue, which is alleged Russian interference in the Trump campaign's potential coordination. And when it was clear that Mueller had nothing on conspiracy or collusion, that's when obstruction became a big deal. But I mean, I can't, like what can we say at this point? The fact that, there's been so many humiliations every step of the way, never any evidence of the Trump-Russia conspiracy we were promised. Everybody ignored that. And now we have this Mueller hearing where the savior figure, it doesn't grasp basic details of his own investigation. And of course, so how many times did he refuse to answer basic questions? I think the tally was over 200 times that he deflected or declined to answer. So
and he declined to answer a number of questions because he claimed they were outside his purview or outside the purview of the report.
Yeah.
But then, on the other hand, he did get into a number of exchanges about issues that fell outside the purview of the report, such as the bias of Strzok and Page, for example. He commented on that.
Yeah.
Among other topics that, if his logic was consistent, he wouldn't have commented on, which is why he said he couldn't comment on Fusion GPS, or he wasn't familiar with it, whatever.
Yeah.
And he claimed that certain matters were outside the purview of the investigation that were clearly squarely within the purview of the investigation, such as facts pertaining to the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, which he couldn't have investigated more thoroughly.
Yep.
So the logic was just inconsistent. Just if you take what he was saying at face value.
Yeah. Also, the troll farm, he wouldn't comment on that because he was caught basically in a court rebuked him recently because the report claims that there was a sweeping and systematic Russian government interference operation. And a few paragraphs later, it says that the first of two Russian operations was this Russian troll farm known as the Internet Research Agency. Let's forget the fact that the Internet Research Agency put out juvenile clickbait that was mostly unrelated to the election and mostly aired after the election. But there's the unfortunate fact that Mueller never actually directly shows that there's any link between the Russian government and the Internet Research Agency. So it was a totally false insinuation, and a judge rebuked Mueller for that. Mueller had to acknowledge that the report shows no actual tie.
Right. And you discussed that in your article in Real Clear Investigations from a few weeks ago. And actually, Tom McClintock, a Republican member of Congress from California, brought up this point, and it was attributed by certain malefactors online who shall go unnamed to you that McClintock brought this up. I was also accused of somehow feeding talking points to Representative Doug Collins of Georgia, which I will just disavow having done, although that would be pretty cool if he took my talking points. But unfortunately,
Collins did nail Mueller when he got him on the collusion thing, because Mueller was saying that he was asked, your report says that collusion is synonymous with conspiracy, right? And Mueller, no. And then Collins had to read him from his reports showing exactly that, which is something you had to do very often, Michael, on Twitter, is remind people that Mueller's report.
I mean, I did that in person with our mutual friend who shall go unnamed, like Voldemort. and I'm such a dork that I have the exact citation memorized. Yeah. So I knew right away 100% what he was talking about when he brought that up, because it's in the report. But that's a part that, so Mueller gave the impression that he was hid away in like an assisted living facility while other people were conducting the investigation and writing the report.
Yeah.
But there are probably times where he had at least some kind of supervisory role on aspects of the report, right? But that aspect, meaning the legal reasoning that was spelled out on page 180 of volume 1 as to collusion being regarded as largely synonymous with conspiracy, that you could imagine that Mueller just had no role in. That was delegated to some member of his team that was involved in maybe like the research side of dealing, with whatever statutes were applicable. So that Mueller was just totally out to lunch on it. It's almost as if it was the first time that he was made aware that the report named for him, which supposedly he wrote, contained this very relevant detail that had direct bearing on the whole notion of whether collusion was investigated, which it was, if you go by what Mueller's own report says.
Exactly right. And, on that front, there's also the fact when he was asked, did you or who wrote your late March letter to William Barr, and who wrote your May 29th closing statement? And Mueller said, I'm not going to get into that, indicating that he did not write it. And it's fine if you don't write your own stuff if you're someone like Robert Mueller, but at least maybe consult on it and have some hand in it. But it was pretty clear from his, not being able to identify key details of his own report that that he was not driving this, which it's like, as if we needed one more thing to show what a farce this entire Russia investigation was. On top of all the kooky conspiracy theories that have been discredited, the hyper fear mongering about Russian trolls, the absolute refusal to accept this reality, no matter how many times everything blew up in the Russiagate proponents' face. Now we learn that the savior figure and the person in charge of the investigation really was out to lunch.
And it was so sad that I, as someone who is known to be a pretty strident critic of the whole Russia matter, I ended up feeling bad for Robert Mueller.
Me too.
I mean, it was almost like somebody dropped him into this circumstance that he had no desire to be in. I mean, he made clear repeatedly that he did not want to testify.
No.
But you'd think still that somebody of his renown would have at least the basic competence and grasp of the facts at hand, that he could comport himself in a reasonably persuasive or confident fashion. But it was almost like he almost didn't have any conviction about anything that he had been doing for the past 2.5 years. Because, I mean, I know he's 74 years old or whatever, but you would think that he could have done at least adequate preparation and be able to hold himself together to where he could at least give some life to the content of the report. That's what Democrats wanted him to do, right? Their whole strategy was they wanted Mueller to breathe life into the Mueller report by just enunciating facts contained within the Mueller report or assertions. And he wouldn't even do that. He was prodded multiple times into reading quotes from the report, and he said no.
Yeah.
Why would he decline to do that if he was really emphatic about the supreme importance of those quotes? I mean, it's very strange.
Yeah. And, and then they tried to prod him and get him to affirm their theories about obstruction and how Trump committed impeachable offenses, but he wouldn't do that either. So what did they get from him? The only thing they really got from him was him saying that Trump was not totally exonerated. So, Nadler was like, in the very beginning, the first question, or one of the first questions, was President Trump totally exonerated? No. Okay, great. Thank you. Does that matter at all, given that total exoneration is not a legal standard, and it's a bar set by Trump in a tweet, basically? I mean, the question here was always, was there a conspiracy between Trump and Russia? And we were told for 2+ years that there was, and that those of us who doubted it were crazy and Trump supporters and all this crazy stuff. And the person who was brought in as their savior figure is pretty much clueless. And it was like, I wanted to laugh, but it was sad. The one part though where I stopped feeling sympathy for him was when he co-signed Mike Pompeo's view of WikiLeaks as a hostile intelligence service. And then I was like, oh yeah, right. This is why Robert Mueller is there, because he's a neocon basically who adopts the bipartisan foreign policy consensus, which is part of the reason why we have Russiagate, is because elements of the national security state were uncomfortable with Trump, not because they don't like his racism or misogyny, but because they didn't like that he was talking about working with Russia. They didn't like he was talking about not, scaling back foreign military intervention, which of course he has not done, but that's what at least he was saying on the campaign trail. And they didn't see him as a suitable steward of the empire. And I think Robert Mueller falls squarely in that category. So that's why he's in lockstep with Mike Pompeo in calling WikiLeaks a hostile intelligence service. And so, that's why I think Robert Mueller was in this, is because he wanted to, co-sign this way of challenging Trump. And the problem is, I mean, it's fine if Robert Mueller wants to do that, but the question is, do people who are progressives and care about progressive values and care about, a society in which we, respect the outcomes of votes, even if it doesn't go our way, and we challenge Trump based on and we challenge presidents we don't like based on, showing a policy.
Their actual misdeeds rather than their fabricated misdeeds.
Yeah, and trying to jump onto a this like neocon way of challenging him, which is basically accusing him of being soft on Russia and trying to take him down for it. It's just not the way to go.
Yeah, and the exchange that Mueller had about WikiLeaks was one of the few times where Democrats, at least in their mind, probably thought that they got him to contribute something of value, and that it seemed to at least ostensibly reflect poorly on Trump, where, it was Mike Quigley, I believe, of Illinois, who's been one of the worst on Russia, although he's not as high profile as a Schiff or somebody or Lou, but bad in his own understated way. He cited tweets and statements that Trump made in October and November of 2016 touting WikiLeaks, okay? Because much like everybody else in the media, Trump was interested in the revelations that WikiLeaks was providing to the American public about one of the most powerful political factions in the country. I know everybody is very shocked and appalled by that now, but it was pretty straightforward at the time. But, Mueller said that it was problematic, to say the least, that Trump had been touting WikiLeaks. Okay, I don't know why he's using the word problematic like he's a grad student talking about some obscure identity issue. But
yeah, Trump, your touting of WikiLeaks is problematic.
Okay. Yeah, problematic in what sense, Bob? I mean, illegal, immoral. I mean, could you be a little more specific? But that was an exchange that was at least plausibly tailored to, clipping out and then circulating on social media, which is what a lot of these Congress people now intentionally try to do, is like have a really tight, compelling, like 3 or 4 minute clip that they can then tweet and then put on Facebook and whatever. But yeah, like you said, it's ironic because it's not as though that moment was somehow reflective of Mueller really sticking it to Trump for any kind of that moment highlighted Mueller's position within the broad bipartisan national security establishment consensus.
Yeah.
And that is what he was using to malign Trump.
Yeah.
And it was being cheered by Democrats because in the moment, yeah, I mean, it takes Trump down a peg, although who cares about that at this point, really, in terms of what Trump's saying he loves WikiLeaks? I mean, Trump's Justice Department is currently prosecuting Julian Assange. So it's not as though like that's a new or novel revelation at this point. But anyway, it underscores what you said about Russiagate really always being about valorizing elements of the national security state who had these kind of circumstantial criticisms of Trump, and then making that the central criticism of Trump's presidency, and having Democrats all glom onto that because they thought that it was the most convenient way to disempower Trump, when actually, arguably, it's done the opposite by empowering him.
Yeah. You raised a really good point about how the fact that, they're lamenting the fact that Trump tweeted some nice things about and said some nice things about WikiLeaks. Well, in 2016, while he's currently prosecuting Julian Assange under the Espionage Act, these unprecedented charges against the publisher. So really what they're doing is actually, while they're condemning candidate Trump, they're praising President Trump for what he's doing right now. And, showing just how far Russiagate has pushed, what are supposed to be Trump's opposition to the right. And, this line. So after they couldn't prove a conspiracy, shocking that they couldn't prove a conspiracy between Trump and Russia, then it shifted, courtesy of Adam Schiff, to the fact that the Trump campaign welcomed Russia's help. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's
a talking point you hear constantly. It drives me crazy. Welcome their help.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It doesn't mean anything.
If WikiLeaks publishes something that I find favorable to my political interests, I'm therefore welcoming their help.
Yeah.
It's so vague and it's so misleadingly phrased because it implies some kind of active, collusive relationship between the receiver of the help and the giver of the help, which, as we know, does not exist.
Even within its own internal logic, it actually isn't plausible, because the thing is, back when they're talking about the time period in question, Russia had not been formally accused by the U.S. intelligence community of hacking the emails yet. In the summer 2016, CrowdStrike had said that, but it took a while for the U.S. intelligence community to come out and formally say it. It wasn't until, I think, the DHS put out a statement in like late September or October. So the time they're talking about when Trump is praising WikiLeaks, for the most part, it's not even officially said to be Russia yet, although there were allegations of it. And then they're also talking about Don Jr. welcoming Russia's help when he accepts the Trump Tower meeting. The problem is the overture that he was receptive to did not come from Russia. Leaves that part out of his report because it was written by Rob Goldstone. He wrote this email saying, we have some information for you on that could be incriminating for Hillary and her dealings with Russia. This is part of the Russian government support. And Don Jr. was like, cool, if that's what you say it is, I love it. What everyone leaves out, Mueller acknowledges that there was no such information presented, but he leaves out the fact that Rob Goldstone, the person who wrote the email, who's a British music publicist, was lying. He made it up. He didn't have much information. He was told to get a meeting for his Russian client, so he freestyled. He used his publicist tactics. Everyone leaves that out. So it's like we're damning the Trump campaign for welcoming a fictional offer. And in terms of welcoming, they welcomed the publication of emails that were embarrassing about their opponent. Who didn't? And everybody welcomed, quote unquote, Russia's help because every major outlet published those emails. This is assuming, of course, that those emails were even stolen by Russia. So even internally, even by its own logic, it doesn't even make sense.
Right. And I defy anybody to go back and listen to the interview that I did with Rob Goldstone on this very YouTube channel. Maybe the most extensive interview that he's done. I don't know. And tell me that you believe that the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, which Rob Goldstone, this random British music publicist, happened to, just by an accident of fate, facilitate because by pure coincidence he met Donald Trump at various entertainment functions years prior and helped to set up his trip to the a beauty pageant in Moscow in 2013. Okay, that is tantamount to welcoming help on behalf of the Russian government.
Yeah.
I wish I could send that podcast interview that I did to, I don't know, not everybody in America, but at least everybody who wants to, in good faith, have a true understanding of this entire story, because it really, if you listen to that, the whole thing just devolves into such farce that it would be funny if it weren't so tragic, and it is still funny, honestly. But this person ending up being the crux of this entire offer of help could not be more absurd. And Adam Schiff brought this up in one of the moments that was one of the few moments that was heralded as Mueller somehow reinforcing Democratic narratives.
Yeah.
Schiff asked him, and Schiff, is like, because Schiff is on TV 24/7, he has this kind of like inclination toward maximum efficiency for that kind of medium.
Oh yeah.
Whereas some other of these questioners did not.
Yeah.
And Schiff's constituency just happens to be Hollywood.
Yep.
I don't know whether that has an impact on whether he has this polished performance. But he said, quote, to Mueller, I gather that you believe that knowingly accepting foreign assistance during a presidential election is an unethical thing to do. Mueller replies, and a crime given certain circumstances. Schiff, we can agree that it is also unpatriotic. True. Okay, so let's just parse that exchange for a second. Okay? Schiff says accepting foreign assistance. What is assistance? Assistance could be somebody in Canada texting you and saying, hey, I heard that I was watching the news and I saw that there are some towns in like northeastern Pennsylvania that might be trending toward Trump. You might want to go over there and like check it out. It could be as minimal and trivial as that. I mean, that's why they use these vague words that you could just project your own definition onto. Foreign assistance. He's not even saying anything financial because Mueller found in the report that the offer of, quote, assistance was so inconsequential that they couldn't charge any campaign finance conspiracy because the thing of value that was given to Don Jr. didn't rise to the level of having any value.
But you know what, though? My problem with that is even exploring that question of whether or not it had value is actually disingenuous in itself, because it presumes that the offer is genuine.
Right.
An offer
no,
is
I agree. But even if you accept that it was somehow a genuine offer, which it wasn't,
and which
there are multiple layers of fallacy here.
Exactly. But you know, and Goldstone testified. I talked to Rob Goldstone this week. He's such a nice guy, right?
Yeah.
He's such a nice guy. And he pointed out, he testified to Mueller, made it very clear that he made it all up. And that is not mentioned in Mueller's report, which then leads them to take this offer seriously, to treat it as an actual Russian offer when it's not. And it's actually one of the most disingenuous examples in the report I can think of, which is actually, it's tough competition because there are so many. But, and by the way, I mean, it's like, then you have to, then you get into this thing where it's like, Schiff says all these things based on fallacious premises. So for example, you know, you could have asked Mueller, did the Trump campaign actually receive directly and accept directly any foreign assistance? The answer is no. You know, because again, this Goldstone thing was a fake offer, and George Papadopoulos was told something about the Russians might have something on Hillary Clinton that might release it. But Papadopoulos didn't tell anybody on the Trump campaign. At least there's no evidence that he did, and Mueller even affirms that. And also, it's not even clear the person he spoke to was acting on behalf of Russia. And in fact, it looks like Joseph Mifsud, this person I'm talking about, actually has Western ties. And tellingly, when Mueller was asked about that, he refused to answer. So
yeah, he had nothing to say about Mifsud, who, according to the telling provided in the report, launched the entire episode here.
The predicate. I mean, he's the predicate.
He's the predicate, and Mueller is, you know, hamstrung from saying even a word about Mifsud, as if. And we should also point out how ridiculous that is, because this is a closed investigation. Yeah. There's no indication that Mifsud is implicated in any of the subsidiary investigations that were farmed out to the various federal districts.
No.
So what's the rationale for Mueller saying zero about Mifsud?
The rationale is that the Mifsud case underscores how baseless the entire Russia investigation is. It's a supposed predicate, which I don't actually believe, but we don't have any concrete information yet to say exactly what the predicate was, if not that. But you know, it's
a public predicate. I think there are private predicates that have yet to come out.
Because you know, we were told first that Mifsud allegedly told Papadopoulos that the Russians have stolen emails, but if you look at what actually happened, Papadopoulos was never told that, or at least according to the person who relayed the tip to the FBI, Papadopoulos wasn't told that. Alexander Downer, who Papadopoulos spoke to, who then told the FBI about the Papadopoulos-Mifsud conversation, Alexander Downer says that when Papadopoulos was talking to him about Mifsud's conversation, the Papadopoulos said that Mifsud never mentioned what the Russians actually have. So he never even mentioned stolen emails. All he said is the Russians might have damaging information on Hillary Clinton, which they might use. So it was incredibly vague and incredibly ambiguous. And we're supposed to believe that that's what led the FBI to open up a counterintelligence investigation of a president.
No, it's a phony predicate. And you want to know what the real predicate was? And I'm not asserting this because I know 100% that it's true, but it's my inference based on following the story very closely for a long time. The true predicate was ideological. It was a political predicate.
Yeah.
It was a sense within a very paranoid and vulnerable state apparatus that there was this outside threat which threatened to upend its conception of what the prevailing order was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And therefore, they were going to come up with a predicate to justify what was at its essence a political action.
Yep.
And that's why they have to now put up this cover story of George Papadopoulos sitting in a bar somewhere with this mysterious figure as reason to launch an investigation of unprecedented proportions, which had direct bearing on on domestic electoral affairs, which is supposed to be walled off completely, you'd think, from almost all law enforcement or intelligence intervention. And they just did away with that precedent and decided to come up with this, cover story.
And liberals have co-signed that, which of course sets us up for if there's a president in the future who wants to reevaluate our relationship with Israel and stop U.S. support for the occupation, or says many other things that go against U.S. bipartisan orthodoxy, then liberals and the resistance has co-signed a new predicate where it will be legitimate for the intelligence agencies to use their power to go after that candidate and investigate them.
And just on Papadopoulos real quick, because Representative Jim Himes of Connecticut also did one of these conflation exercises where he suggested that the Russians, that's the term he used, implying that he means the Russian government, quote, previewed the fact that they had stolen emails to George Papadopoulos. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know how many times we have to go over this stuff, and the story is so complex and multifaceted, as we've discussed many times, that unless it's like your full-time job to follow it, you have to. It makes sense that you're gonna forget or lose sight of some of the core details. But that's just totally 100% false. It's not even claimed in the Mueller report that happened.
No, it's not. It's not. And in fact, if you read the Mueller report,
this is a member of Congress just saying it because that's the media environment that we're in now. He's not going to get fact-checked on any of that, except for maybe a handful of largely right-wing outlets. But those are going to be dismissed as unserious, and the lie is just going to be allowed to perpetuate.
Let me read you actually how the Mueller report portrays the Papadopoulos predicate, because it's even with the Mueller report's language, they can't hide how thin the predicate is. Okay, so it's this. They're talking about the decision to open up the initial FBI investigation. Papadopoulos had suggested, that's the first, qualified or sort of ambiguous word, suggested. Papadopoulos had suggested to a representative of a foreign government that the Trump campaign had received indications, okay, it's a second sort of qualified ambiguous word, indications from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information damaging a Democratic presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton. So suggested to Alexander Downer that the Trump campaign had received indications, which is ambiguous, from the Russian government that it could assist the campaign through the anonymous release of information damaging a Democratic presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton. So again, there's nothing in there about saying that the FBI learned that Papadopoulos was told about the Russians stole emails.
Yeah, it was. But if that's your predicate, shouldn't you want the predicate to be more assertive or at least a more, conclusive in its wording? Though you just listed several weasel word qualifiers that could be interpreted in all kinds of ways. That wouldn't be an adequate predicate in most ordinary criminal investigations. You'd have to have more concrete language.
That's all they can do, and that's how Russiagate has persisted. It's the continued use of innuendo and qualified language to suggest something nefarious and damning that isn't there. That's why, for example, Konstantin Kalimnik, Manafort's business associate, Mueller never calls him a Russian agent or says he is a Russian spy or a Russian asset. He says he has ties to Russian intelligence. What does that mean, ties? Does that mean
it means nothing?
It means nothing, and that's why he can never call him. Mueller can never make a definitive statement about anything. It's always suggestive. It's always qualified. Even when he talks about the Russians stealing emails, he says in the report now, he says the Russians appear to have stolen the emails during the sessions when he's trying to suggest that they stole them. He doesn't.
I remember. By the way, you discussed that wording in your Real Clear Investigations piece, but it was just amazing to me at the time when the Mueller report came out, and I was reading through it, and I noted this section where he doesn't assert any definitive link in the transmission of the WikiLeaks emails, or the emails that WikiLeaks ultimately published. I mean, the chain of custody was not definitively established in the Mueller report, but it's just taken as gospel now that it had been when it wasn't.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So Mueller, in the indictment and in the report, he suggests, but he doesn't assert, and people everyone just ignores this part. They don't use their sort of rational thinking and basic logic. And basic evidentiary standards. He suggests, doesn't assert, that this, what he calls a Russian cutout named Guccifer 2.0, transferred the emails to WikiLeaks. By the way, with an implausible timeline, because by the time Mueller says Assange first communicated with Guccifer 2.0 and got some files from them, Assange had already announced that he had the stolen Democratic Party leaks, right? So basically, according to Mueller's timeline, Assange would have had to have announced that the Democratic Party leaks before he communicated with the source and before he got the information from his source. That's one more inconsistency. So, but Mueller, he never asserts that actually Guccifer 2.0 gave Assange the stolen emails. He only suggests it. And that's why in the report, he also adds that we cannot rule out that WikiLeaks got the information from intermediaries, which means Mueller,
we cannot rule out an entirely different explanation that would cut against everything that we've tried to insinuate thus far.
Exactly right. Which he and that is different because in the indictment of the GRU officers in July 2018, he did not include that disclaimer. So it's interesting that he adds that now. Before I forget a point, I want to go back to what we're talking about, foreign help. The only party that actually directly received and used foreign help was the Clinton campaign, and not just with the Steele dossier that it paid for. And there's all this talk there about, was that an operation by the Russians? I don't actually think Steele used anybody actually in Russia. I think he used sources who read the newspaper and used their imaginations and gave him some stuff. But anyway, but also there's, putting aside that, like you could argue maybe that the Clinton campaign paid for it openly. So, that's not receiving assistance from a foreign government because they got it from a private firm. Okay. But the Clinton campaign got information from Ukraine, from the Ukrainian embassy, and they used it. They used it actually really in a really consequential way. So not only did they receive assistance from a foreign government, they used it because they got from Ukraine this ledger about Paul Manafort, showing that Paul Manafort was supposedly said to receive millions of dollars in secret payments, and which
was leaked to the Associated Press in August of 2016, and in the New York Times, and that precipitated Manafort being ousted from the Trump campaign.
Exactly right. So not only did they get actual assistance in contrast to the Trump camp, but they used the assistance, and that assistance was incredibly consequential because it led to the ouster of Trump's campaign manager, and also fueled these suspicions about, suspect Russian ties inside the Trump campaign. So by Schiff's own standards, as he sermonizes about how terrible it is to receive foreign help, it's only the Democratic Party that actually committed the offense that he's so angry about.
And the standard is not tenable. The standard that Schiff articulates obviously is intended only to suggest that acts that Trump undertook were criminal in his receipt of supposed foreign assistance. One thing that I've pointed out is, did you know that foreign nationals are legally permitted under the FEC regulations to provide U.S. presidential campaigns with help? Foreign nationals can come to the United States and volunteer for presidential campaigns or any campaign, and thereby provide assistance, which would be stuff of value. And That's all legal. So if in order for this logic to make any sense, that would now have to become criminalized, which of course it never will, because the logic isn't designed to make sense. It's designed to satisfy this kind of transient emotional need that people have to cast this narrative in the most incendiary possible terms.
Exactly right. And xenophobes, of course, don't have logic. I mean, like, xenophobia is not based on any logic at all. And here, the fashionable xenophobia is anything to do with Russia is nefarious and suspicious. I mean, Schiff doesn't care about contacts with, anybody else really but Russia. It's Russia who are devils, and any contacts with them are suspicious. And that's why, it's considered damning that people in the Trump camp either spoke to someone with a Russian passport or spoke to someone who claims to know someone with a Russian passport. But in fact, if and I really wanted Mueller to be asked this. I wanted Mueller to be asked, did anybody in the Trump camp have any interactions with anybody actually acting on the Kremlin's behalf? Which means, Joseph Mifsud, Konstantin Kilimnik, and all these other people who it's taken on faith without evidence that they're Kremlin agents. But I wish Mueller could be asked, who do you actually assert actually acted on the Kremlin's behalf, who interacted with the Trump camp? Because presumably to have a conspiracy or collusion, you need some interaction between the two sides. There's
one of the very few people who you could plausibly claim was acting on the Kremlin's behalf was Sergei Kislyak,
the ambassador, exactly,
who is an ambassador, who shook the hand of Jeff Sessions at an event at the Republican convention in Cleveland in 2016, which then led to Sessions recusing from the investigation and caused the special counsel to be appointed in the first place. It's like a comedy of errors, right? So Sessions recuses. That leads to Rosenstein taking over and a special counsel being appointed. The special counsel investigates the very interaction which led to Sessions recusing, which Al Franken supposedly got him to lie about under oath, which was totally exaggerated in the first place. And Mueller's report determines that there was nothing at all improper about that brief and meaningless interaction that Sessions and Kislyak just by happenstance had at the convention.
Yep.
And yet in the talking point memo that Pelosi put out the night before the Mueller testimony, it continues to characterize all the interactions that Trump officials had with supposed Russian connected or tied figures as improper, even though Mueller, to a farcical extent, exhaustively examined every one of these potentially improper interactions and found that virtually none of them were improper, at least rising to the level of improper to be illegal. And in fact, there's nothing improper. It's actually proper to have cordial, ordinary interactions with somebody like the Russian ambassador.
Yes. So there's the interaction with the Russian ambassador who is actually acting on behalf of the Kremlin, and Mueller finds no evidence of any conspiracy there. The only other interaction with the Kremlin intermediary is when Michael Cohen speaks on the phone to an assistant in the Kremlin press office. And amazingly, Schiff tried to use this as evidence that the Russians could blackmail the Trump campaign. Because Michael Cohen was trying to build Trump Tower Moscow at the prodding, by the way, of FBI informant Felix Sater, which is another curious character who has not gotten very much scrutiny. But anyway, that's for another time. But there's a lot of, people with FBI or Democratic
lot of loose ends like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
but it's
Michael Caputo insists that he was basically entrapped into having an investigation, an interaction with an FBI asset that led to him being embroiled in the Mueller investigation. Now, Caputo wasn't charged, and I did an interview with him again on this channel that people can go back and look, as well as Papadopoulos. I mean, I've dealt with all these characters at this point.
You have,
but they all at least have plausible cases that they were roped into this investigation by people who were not who they said they were, and in fact were working on behalf of either the U.S. government or some foreign government in ways that weren't apparent at the time.
Which
is fine. I mean, you laugh, but I mean, none of this stuff is still. I mean, we're waiting for the IG report from Barr, which will delve into some of it. I don't know if they actually will look into the Caputo stuff, but I mean, the fact that none of that gets any airing whatsoever in a 7-hour testimony.
Well, there's so much to go over and so much ridiculous stuff that it's hard to get it all in. And even today in our conversation, which I have to wrap up soon. I mean, what's crazy is there's so many ridiculous things and glaring holes that are still there, but we can't even get to all of them. But
we could go on for 24 hours straight. Probably
we really could. Sadly, just like that performance you attended where they read the Mueller report live at an art gallery. So anyway, so Cohen.
God, that was sad. There were like 4 people there when I showed up on a Sunday morning, and it was just like, what are we doing here, people?
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to describe the entire Russia investigation. So Michael Cohen calls the other Kremlin intermediary who shows up in the report and asked for assistance in building Trump Tower Moscow. And the Kremlin assistant told Michael Cohen, sorry, we can't help you. And that's why in Mueller's report, there's really no other there's no other contact after that between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin, because the Kremlin denied Michael Cohen's bid for help. But then somehow Schiff turns this into damning contacts between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign, and how the Kremlin can use this somehow as leverage over the Trump campaign and blackmail it, though he doesn't explain how. And, it got so farcical in terms of this effort to find out contacts between Trump and Russia that there's an article on Real Clear Investigations that came out a few days ago, and it's about the footnotes in the Mueller report, which a lot of people skipped over. I mean, if, among those who even read the report, which according to some polls is like 2% of the country, which I don't blame anybody for not reading. Because
Joe Biden didn't even read it.
Yeah, I don't blame him. That's fair enough.
Neither did Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, but you pointed out, Michael, that the Mueller team dragged on the investigation because they followed the hot Jerome Corsi lead.
Right.
Jerome Corsi,
where they ended up spending hours and hours debating the nature of memory with Jerome Corsi,
one of the leading proponents of birtherism, and somehow he was going to turn up the link between WikiLeaks and the Trump campaign via Roger Stone,
who claims that he had a divine revelation on an airplane.
Yes,
where he just ascertained that the emails had been. Who even knows what his story was? But it was so ridiculous that to give anything at all that he was involved in any credence whatsoever is even more absurd.
Yeah. So so speaking of absurd, okay. So in terms of the Mueller team went to such lengths to investigate any possible Russia tie that they're after the election, Trump is now the president-elect, and this article about the Mueller footnotes points this out. After Trump is president-elect, there's a chess tournament in New York City, okay. And there's
I know this.
And Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson,
Trump was supposedly invited.
There was
didn't attend.
There was a rumor he was invited or something like that.
Yeah.
And so Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, is traveling to New York to go to the tournament, and this guy named Dmitriev, who's trying to connect, who knows both people in the Kremlin and also George Nader, the now accused child porn trafficker and pedophile, who was a Mueller witness.
Key Mueller witness.
Yeah. So this guy Dmitriev,
who they forgot to charge
when he was
substantially after he had. Supposedly they found his phones after he had given all his supposedly key testimony over to the Mueller team.
Yeah, that's really believable. So this guy Dmitriev says he also asked George Nader to invite Jared Kushner to the chess event. So that Dmitriev could meet him, because Dmitriev wanted to establish contacts in the Trump.
Right. So it was Kushner that was invited, not Trump himself. Right.
But hold on, George Nader did not pass along Dmitriev's invitation to anyone connected with the incoming administration. Okay, but although one World Chess Federation official recalled hearing from an attendee that President-elect Trump had stopped by the tournament, the investigation did not establish that Trump or any campaign or transition team official attended the event.
Right.
And hold on a second. And the president's written answers denied that he had. So because one official in the chess tournament heard from somebody who attended it that Trump visited the president-elect visited the press tournament, that led Mueller and his team to chase that lead, and they investigated it so much so that they submitted a question to Donald Trump, to President Trump, about that. The question is this from Mueller: were you asked to attend the World Chess Championship gala on November 10th, 2016? If yes, who asked you to attend? When were you asked, and what were you told about why your presence was requested?
This is
And
how desperate they were.
a follow-up: did you attend any part of the event? If yes, describe any interactions you had with any Russians representatives of the Russian government at the event. So basically, the Mueller team is doing this investigation because they heard a rumor that Trump, when he was president-elect, stopped by a chess tournament. They're trying to see if he met with any Russians there, and
because that's where Trump would carry out his collusion plot at the chess tournament.
Yeah.
Well, and you talk about how desperate they were. They interviewed people like Fedor Emelianenko, who was an MMA fighter. The FBI ended up interviewing that guy because he might have key information on the global conspiracy.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so let's wrap up. I just want to have a concluding thought, and this is what I'm trying to arrive at in synthesizing all this information. It's just that one of the reasons why Mueller was totally incapable of defending virtually any aspect of the investigation was, I guess, maybe he was maybe it's because he's 74 years old and he's past his prime and he didn't get enough sleep the prior night. Okay, possibly, but also because the investigation was built upon a foundation of fallacies. So, of course, he really can't defend it in a substantive, vigorous way.
Exactly.
Because he must have some inclination somewhere in the recesses of his mind, even if he's not fully conscious of it, that all of these puzzle pieces don't fit together in the way that they had wanted them to. And therefore, he's not able to mount this kind of strident defense of the key aspects of it, because a huge amount of the Mueller report actually exculpated Trump and Trump officials on the major allegations that were against them and drove the narrative from the outset. So that, I think, is really the ultimate reason why Mueller looked like he just got dragged out of bed and hadn't had coffee yet.
I totally agree. Blaming Mueller for yesterday gives the investigation way too much credit. It presumes that this investigation is something to take seriously, when the notion of a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government was always a farce. Somebody did steal the Democratic Party emails. That happened. And, that's worth investigating. Did it require a special counsel investigation? No, I don't think so. And compounding the farce was then this effort to portray Russia as engaging in this sweeping operation and trying to prove that juvenile social media posts were a part of that weren't even connected to the Russian government. So this whole thing was a farce, and no, even if Robert Mueller was fully present and had everything going on cognitively, it still wouldn't have made a huge difference, because the investigation was such a joke. And in fact, the fact that Robert Mueller had trouble hearing and couldn't follow actually maybe helped him at times, because it helped him avoid answering questions. And maybe if someone had been more engaged, they would have had to acknowledge even more directly that the investigation was so baseless.
Yeah.
So, look, I can't say how many things now have underscored the point we've been making the whole time, just what a joke this is. But I mean, is there a bigger encapsulation of that than the fact that the savior figure was so confused and so clueless?
Yeah. Okay. So one truly final thing, which is that one of the recurring themes of our conversations has been: is this thing over yet, or are we done with the Russiagate? And I've always been more inclined to say no.
Yeah.
Every time that Russiagate seems to hit a valley, a peak then comes afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'm sticking by that even now, even though that the pundit reaction generally to yesterday's testimony was that, oh, Mueller didn't deliver and it was really bad for Democrats. Okay, yeah. I mean, look at other metrics here. And we after Mueller's testimony, 5 new Democratic members of the House of Representatives, including Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, who is the vice chair of the caucus and the most senior member of the House to openly endorse impeachment proceedings thus far, have all come out for impeachment proceedings, when we're right now at 97, roughly, members of the Democratic caucus calling for impeachment proceedings. You only need about 20 more to make a majority in the caucus, okay? and they're now going on August recess. The people who show up to town hall meetings are generally the most energized members of the party's base. I already see Indivisible and all move on all these groups saying we have to flood these town hall meetings and demand impeachment proceedings.
About
So
what? About
we're not that far away from them reaching a critical mass on this. So I'm not willing to go against my rule, which has always served me well, and concede that this is going away anytime soon. I think we're maybe at a different phase now,
Yeah.
but it continues.
when these groups are saying we need to impeach, are they directly citing the Russia investigation and obstruction and all that stuff, or are they talking about other things? Like, are they still saying that the Russia investigation is a basis for impeachment?
Yeah. I mean, they incorporate other elements of why they hate Trump into the argument for impeachment, but that's the crux of it. The fact that Trump supposedly is a felon, as Ted Lieu says, based on his obstructive acts, and therefore Congress has this solemn obligation to act. I mean, it's being advocated on the New York Times, in the New Yorker. Every prestigious outlet has been calling for this for so long, and they're continuing to do so. They're not dissuaded by Mueller's supposedly lackluster performance. And I think you have to look at other metrics to really understand what the trajectory of this is. And based on the past 24 hours, you had a substantial uptick in members of the House of Representatives calling for impeachment. Gerald Nadler, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, privately lobbied Nancy Pelosi yesterday to initiate the proceedings. And he could theoretically just initiate them on his own. And Nancy Pelosi has softened, according to Jackie Speier of California, on the question of impeachment, which is understandable given the growing numbers of members who are calling for it. So somebody explain to me why I should believe this is going away.
Well, I mean, and why I'm certainly don't expect it to go away is because the Russia fear-mongering is bipartisan, and it's useful for all parties to drum up support for the intelligence community and justify the budgets of intelligence agencies. So that's why today, the day after Mueller, the Senate Intelligence Committee dropped the first part of its review of the Russia matter, and it's all about how Russia attacked our voting infrastructure. And there was a big article in the headline in the Washington Post today that Iran is now picking up on or following Russia's lead and sowing disinformation in 2020. So that fear-mongering aspect will not go away. And in terms of the impeachment part, I just hope that what people get is that, or people always think about, is that, in the same way that the Russia investigation was used as an excuse for Democrats to not be a real opposition party, because as they were mounting this thing, they were actually going along with or failing to seriously challenge so many of Trump's awful policies, like the coup in Venezuela, Adam Schiff, Pelosi, all of them support all that. Imposing murderous sanctions on Venezuela, they all support that. War with Iran, they're mildly critical, but supportive of other aspects of the Trump administration's warmongering against Iran. And so, focusing on the Russia investigation was a way to pretend that they were an actual opposition party. And I think even though impeachment on the surface, it makes it look like they're standing up to Trump and being a real opposition party, if it's based on something so empty, which is the Russia investigation, then actually you're only helping Trump, because it's performative, to use a word we hear often. I realize it makes people feel good on the surface, and there are plenty of reasons to want the Trump presidency to go away, and I get that. But the way to do it is not you have to think somewhat strategically about what's going to fly. And if you're doing it for anything that's resulted from a baseless investigation that has been so humiliating and embarrassing, it's just not going to work. So you can think on the surface that that's standing up to Trump, and really, I think it's actually ultimately helping him. And I hope that some people will think about that as this thing maybe picks up steam.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's baseless and it's embarrassing and everything that you just spelled out there, obviously. But, and I think we've talked about this briefly before, but I'm just not convinced that, notwithstanding the baselessness, they couldn't use it to some degree that might be politically advantageous just by keeping Trump's supposed corruptions in the public eye for an extended period of time. You could almost imagine it creating some kind of Trump Fatigue, I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I just think it's an open question as to what the political impact of a protracted impeachment inquiry would be. I don't think that you can necessarily say, oh, it didn't work on Bill Clinton, therefore it would help Trump. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. I think it's an open question. And one of the true tragedies would that they would be able to use such a scam and a fraud in a way that might actually confer to them various, at least short-term political advantages, and that it could cause Trump to act out. He might react some way to it that's bad. Again, I just think it's an open question as to what the ultimate effect would be. And I think we should be a little humble about that, notwithstanding our mutual belief that it would be predicated on a total fraud and joke.
I'm skeptical. Hillary Clinton ran on Trump being an awful person and him being all corrupt and stuff. And how did that turn out? So I see this as a continuation of Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign strategy, which does not have an encouraging track record. By the way, and we forget about this, when the Russia investigation was ebbing and flowing, and maybe there was it was sinking in for some people that it wasn't going to pan out. Then all of a sudden it became the SDNY. The SDNY was going to bring Trump down.
Remember, Ryan Lizza said after the Mueller report was after the Barr letter, or after the Mueller report was submitted, I think, and there was no conspiracy indictments, obviously. But Ryan Lizza said he did a tweet that I just saw again recently. It was something like, "Whisper, hey, the Mueller investigation was always a sideshow. The real action was in the SDNY."
Right,
like he gave this knowing glance, as you can convey over Twitter, that the real stuff was always over here. And it's
okay. So whisper to Ryan Lizza. I don't know if you noticed, but last week the SDNY investigation closed, and they have no further indictments of anybody, nobody else in the Trump organization. So sorry, that didn't work out either. And the thing is, you might not have seen about it because it basically. The news was presented with a whisper. It was basically acknowledged on one day and then it went away,
Right.
And compare that to all the endless hours of, of news coverage and how many times people declared the walls are closing in based on SDNY, So anyway, so it's basically, if you want to pursue impeachment along these same lines, there was an article in the Washington Post this week talking about, despite months and months of congressional investigations, Democrats have been unable to produce really anything damning on Trump at all. I'm paraphrasing, but it's so, I don't see how that strategy yields success, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. I don't think it doesn't yield success in any normative sense or any sense that is like actually on the substance good.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be humble about not allowing, or at least this is how I try to approach political issues, not to allow my own assumptions about the virtue of a particular subject.
Fair enough. Yeah.
To necessarily dictate my analysis of what the overall effect would be politically on the rest of the country. So
fair enough. So, by the way, Michael, I think so far our track record is pretty good. Going by our predictions. But
I mean, I just saw. Okay, this is sort of a different subject. I know you have to go, but I just saw Jamel Bowie of the New York Times complaining on Twitter, and this doesn't have to do with Russian per se, but it's sort of connected, that people are repeating the mistake of 2016 and not believing that Trump has any chance of winning.
Yeah.
So that brought my mind back to, 2016, when Jamel Bowie, you can go and look at his track record. I mean, these are all published stories. He said Trump basically had as much of a chance to win as as Earth getting hit by a comet,
right,
and being destroyed.
Yeah.
So that was Jamel Bowie in August of 2016, proclaiming exactly what he's saying is now a mistake that's getting repeated. I remember in 2016, I just knew that all the people who contributed to the failure analytically about what Trump's significance was electorally, and just transition seamlessly into pushing Russiagate. There was never any mechanism to hold them accountable at all, and therefore they would try to whitewash the entire thing and memory hole it, and then portray themselves as these kind of founts of wisdom. And sure enough, that's what happened, because where did Jamel Bowie go? He went all the way up now to the New York Times.
Yeah.
So there was no repercussion at all for his horrible analysis and wrong predictions.
There
was only reward.
Yeah. There's been no self-reflection amongst anybody, like zero. I've seen nobody say, you know what, we bought into this thing and we denigrated those who didn't. And, they were right to, ask to basically be rational human beings and demand evidence for claims. And,
they twisted it into a narrative where they were actually right. And the handful of guys, and sadly, they're all guys, it seems.
Well,
there's
some women. I can.
Okay, but like
we often get accused of being like which is not true. There's
okay, but like the core four, how like you have like on a basketball team or something, it would be like the yeah, like Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and Steve Kerr or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like they twisted into a narrative where we were actually the ones who were wrong and had to apologize because the Mueller report had all this incredibly damning stuff about obstruction, and then Bill Barr covered it up. So we were they somehow ended up doing this kind of sleight of hand, which was incredible, which to prove that we were wrong and they were right. So therefore, why would they have to reflect on anything if they were, if they had it right?
I'm gonna use the G word here, gaslighting, Michael. It
is gaslighting, which is a word I hate, but I can't think of a word in the modern English vocabulary which better encapsulates it.
I hate it too.
All right, let's stop it there. We went over your suggested time limit, but
hey, there's too much to talk about.
All in good fun.
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you soon, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Oh, wait. Do you want to plug your new thing?
Oh, yes. The animation died out on my screen, but it's called Pushback. It's on the Gray Zone, and it's my new show. I'll be interviewing people, doing what I used to do at The Real News and Democracy Now, and pushing back. And trying to have as many sort of spirited discussions as I have, and as I can, and covering the news. And I'm doing that with Max Blumenthal and the other great people at the Gray Zone, and we just started.
Okay, very good. I will be on the lookout for that, of course. And let's actually end now. So I'll talk to you later.
Good night.